Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
We have new developments on the pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University and across the country. Let's get the very latest with Bloomberg's John Tucker.
Shame on you! Shame on you!
At the epicenter of the protests, New York City police moved in just after 9 o'clock last night, entering Columbia University's Hamilton Hall with a ladder truck through an upstairs window. They pushed through mounds of furniture piled up as barricades. As arrests were made, some people were led away bound by zip ties. Mayor Eric Adams did deliver a warning before police began making arrests.
I'm urging every student and every protester to walk away from this situation now and continue your advocacy through other means.
The police commissioner said among those arrested were people who had no affiliation with Columbia. As those arrested were loaded on buses, demonstrators on the streets waved Palestinian flags and chanted Intifada. The building was cleared of protesters after about 2 hours. That was the scene in New York. In Los Angeles early today, police were responding immediately to a request for support on the University of California campus. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thanks. Well, lawmakers are calling more university leaders to Capitol Hill to testify about anti-Semitism on campus. And Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons reports.
With pro-Palestinian protests and encampments growing at universities across the country, the House Committee on Education and the Workforce is expanding its questioning about campus activity. It's now calling on the presidents of Yale, the University of Michigan, and UCLA to testify May 23rd. The presidents of Harvard, MIT, and Penn appeared before the committee in December, while the president of Columbia testified in early April. Most who have appeared before the committee have been criticized by some lawmakers as being evasive and overly legalistic. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Nancy, thank you. In the Middle East, Secretary of State Antony Blinken continues his push for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Blinken met today in Tel Aviv with Israeli President Isaac Herzog, and he called on Hamas to accept Israel's terms for a pause in fighting in exchange for hostages.
We're determined to get a ceasefire that brings the hostages home and to get it now. And the only reason that wouldn't be achieved is because of Hamas.
Secretary Blinken says the release of hostages in Gaza is at the heart of U.S. foreign policy. That policy may be shifting when it comes to Palestinians caught up in the fighting. According to CBS News, the Biden administration is considering allowing certain Palestinians into the U.S. as refugees if they have family members who are American citizens or permanent residents. Till now, the more than 4-decade-old U.S. refugee program has never been used to resettle Palestinians in large numbers.
Well, Nathan, in legal news this morning, former President Donald Trump is getting a break from his Manhattan hush money trial today. But there have been significant developments in the last 24 hours. And Bloomberg Law host June Grasso has the details from New York.
Donald Trump was held in contempt of court yesterday and fined $9,000 for repeatedly violating a gag order that barred him from making public statements about witnesses and jurors. The judge warned that if there are other violations, Trump may end up in jail. And the jury heard the most vivid testimony yet about payments to silence a former Playboy playmate, Karen McDougal, and an adult film star, Stormy Daniels, before the 2016 election. Los Angeles attorney Keith Davidson, who represented both, recounted frantic talks with Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, and the National Enquirer, whose publisher wanted to help Trump win the presidency. In New York, June Grasso, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, June, thank you. Turning to markets, futures are lower as we begin this new trading month. The S&P 500 dropped more than 4% in April, snapping a streak of 5 straight monthly gains. The dollar notched its 4th consecutive monthly advance. That's the longest winning run for the greenback since September 2022.
Well, Nathan, corporate earnings continue to be front and center. Shares of Amazon up more than 2% in early trading. Profit and revenue came in above analyst estimates. The company's cloud unit, AWS, posted the strongest sales growth in a year. We get more from Bloomberg technology host Ed Ludlow from San Francisco.
AWS is the clear market leader in cloud, bigger than Microsoft Azure, certainly bigger than Google's cloud platform. It's seeing accelerating growth. Growth in the fourth quarter was about 13%. It's now nearer to 14.5%, 15%. And the strategy is basically to be a place where other companies who are interested in AI can build whatever software it is they want on AWS's platforms.
And Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow says despite the strong cloud performance, the company's sales forecast for the current quarter fell short of estimates.
Well, Karen, a couple other high-tech companies are taking it on the chin this morning. Shares of Advanced Micro Devices are down more than 6%. The second biggest maker of computer processors gave a lukewarm revenue forecast for the current period. It's being weighed down by lackluster demand for chips used in video game hardware.
Well, Nathan, shares of a super microcomputer are down 9.5%. The company did report quarterly sales that tripled from the same period last year, but they fell slightly short of estimates. That's disappointing investors who had sky-high expectations that the server maker's business would benefit from AI-related demand.
And Starbucks investors are getting a jolt to the downside. Those shares are down 12%. Sales at the coffee chain fell for the first time since 2020. If this morning's decline holds, it would be Starbucks' biggest stock drop since March of 2020, the early days of the pandemic.
Well, Nathan, let's turn to the economy now. The Fed is expected to leave rates on hold once again, but attention will turn to Jay Powell's news conference after their decision. We get a preview from Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
If today's Fed meeting were a Dickens novel, it might be called Small Expectations. Policymakers are not going to change the nation's benchmark interest rate. They are not providing new economic forecasts, and they are not issuing a new dot plot outlook for rates. Chair Jay Powell's press conference is essentially the only chance for any market-moving news, and he will be working hard not to provide any. Expected to maintain the Fed line, we don't have enough confidence to cut rates, and we're not thinking of raising rates. At least not yet. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Mike, thanks. Well, for full team coverage of the Fed decision and Powell news conference, stay tuned to Bloomberg Radio and Television for the Bloomberg Surveillance Special, The Fed Decides. It all begins at 1:30 p.m. Wall Street time. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Tim Kennedy declared victory in a special election to replace former New York Representative Brian Higgins and serve the rest of the term. It keeps the Buffalo area district in Democrats' control. Higgins resigned in February after being named president of a performing arts center in Buffalo. Kennedy, a state senator, defeated Republican Gary Dixon, a town supervisor in the upstate New York district that includes the cities of Buffalo and Niagara in the heavily blue district.
This victory is your victory. This victory is our victory. Tonight, we are one step closer to preserving democracy.
Audio courtesy of WIVB TV. The margin of victory for Kennedy was 78 to 22%. A 6-week abortion ban takes effect today in Florida, replacing a previous restriction of 15 weeks. National Right to Life President Carol Tobias.
I'm very excited. About 50% of all abortions occur after that point in pregnancy. So this bill is going to save a lot of lives.
Meanwhile, Michelle Casada, a spokeswoman for Planned Parenthood in Florida, says the ban will have an immediate impact in the state.
We're looking at tens of thousands of patients that are either going to have to travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles to another state with access or be forced to carry a pregnancy against their will.
Casada says most women who seek abortion care are between 8 and 10 weeks pregnant. New York City police fatally shot a man after a brief standoff in Manhattan. Officials say 2 officers and an investigator with the Department of Homeland Security, part of a gang violence task force, identified and approached the 25-year-old man suspected of committing a violent crime. The NYPD says the man ran inside an optical store he was standing in front in Chelsea. Chief Joseph Kennedy says that the man produced a gun, and after a brief struggle, shots were fired.
The male was removed to an area hospital where he was pronounced dead.
A member of the task force received minor injuries. The Biden administration is taking a major step toward reclassifying marijuana as a less dangerous drug. The move would not legalize pot, but the consequences for using it would be less severe. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg Hearing.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Knicks are getting ready to head back to Philadelphia for a Game 6 tomorrow, and it certainly didn't look like that was going to be the case. Game 5 at the Garden. Knicks led the Sixers by 6 with 28 seconds to go, but Tyrese Maxey with a 4-point play, and after Josh Hart missed a free throw, Maxey with a 3-pointer from about 35 feet. Forced overtime. Sixers trailed by 5 in OT. Came back. They won 112-106 as Maxey scored 46 points. Jalen Brunson had 40 in the loss. Knicks coach Tom Thibodeau asked about how regulation ended.
And again, in those situations, you talk about what you want to do. They're out of timeouts. Josh has got 2 free throws. It's 2. So you have to, communicate what your decisions are. And so, we could have done better in that situation, and we will. 2 other games in the East. Milwaukee stayed alive, 115-92 over Indiana, who still leads 3-2. Cleveland topped Orlando by a point. Cavs are up 3-2. Home teams won every game. The season's over for the Islanders. They fought back in Raleigh, down 3-1. Game was tied going to the third period. Carolina with 2 goals in 8 seconds. Hurricanes won 6-3, and the Canes will now take on the Rangers in the second round. Toronto, an overtime win at Boston, cutting the Bruins' lead to 3-2. Nashville won in Vancouver. Colorado finished off Winnipeg. At Citi Field, 3-run homer, 6th inning for DJ Stewart. Gave the Mets a 6-1 win over the Cubs. Another 2-run, light-hitting Yankee loss in Baltimore. Orioles won 4-2. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. We want to get more now on the big tech earnings story of the morning. That would be Amazon. The e-commerce giant reported profit and revenue in the first quarter that did beat Wall Street estimates with its strongest sales growth in the cloud in a year. But the forecast for the current quarter is falling short in what may be a warning sign for the main e-commerce business over at Amazon. Let's bring in Dan Ives for more on these results, senior equity research analyst at Wedbush Securities. Dan, good morning. I know you and a lot of analysts were focused really closely on the cloud. Did AWS come through for you?
This was a trophy case quarter for AWS, 17%. Whispers were 15%. This is exactly what Amazon needed to do to show that the cloud mojo is back. Very important quarter for Jassy and Amazon.
What about the forecast for the current quarter? It did come in a little bit weaker than a lot of analysts expected. Could that be a concern, not just for the e-commerce side, but for the cloud?
Yeah, it could be, but I think Street's looking through this as conservative, and that's why stock will be up today. Look, a key with this name, especially in the shadows of a massive number from Microsoft and Google, Amazon needs to come through on AWS. And it shows not just on cloud, but now the next step in terms of AI, Jassy and Amazon monetizing that. That's the golden goose. That's what the Street's focused on.
Obviously, AWS is the dominant player in the cloud. Do these results show that the cloud side did enough to maintain that position against the pretty impressive numbers we saw last week from Microsoft and Alphabet for their cloud units?
Yeah, I think in this Game of Thrones, they're keeping up. And that's the important thing, because this is not just a winner takes all. You're going to see many, many winners in this AI revolution. Amazon's going to be a key player there. But now you're starting to see a company that I'd say the last few quarters fell backwards against the wall. It's starting to turn. And that is huge for the stock. And it's something that I think investors, even on a ripple effect, are going to look to the rest of tech. It shows this tech earnings season has been robust. All the big tech stalwarts coming through.
Can these tech stalwarts maintain this kind of trajectory when we could see potentially some macro risks when it comes to enterprise spending on AI products? Do you think this kind of demand can continue to be maintained in this economic environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think on the edges, I mean, there could be some soft spots, but overall, this is a fourth industrial revolution that's playing out. And I think that's what we see across tech. You know, it's not going to be straight and to the right, but it's something that we have not seen since 1995.
In the time we have left, Dan, I want to get your take on this confirmation that we've gotten from Tesla that the supercharger network, just about all the workers involved in it are being eliminated. I wonder what you make of that move from Elon Musk.
Look, it's tough decisions that they're making on these cost cuts, but that's what the street wants to see. He'll rebuild it back. But it shows now you finally have an adult in the room with Musk, and that's what investors want to see in Tesla after a very, very tough 6 to 9 months.
What could it mean, though, in terms of EV demand? I mean, a lot of concern is around range anxiety, right? And if the growth of supercharger doesn't potentially stay where it has been, what could that mean for EV demand going forward?
Look, I think writing's on the wall. I think Musk has seen, we've seen in Tesla's results, they're going to have to slow down the supercharger build out, even with these OEM deals. And I think it just shows it's been some dark days for EV demand, but the growth is not over. But it's a smart move for Tesla, even though it's a head scratcher that they actually got rid of the whole department.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.